The morning light spilled through the wide kitchen windows, catching on crystal glasses and silver cutlery. The billionaire, Thomas Reed, sat at the head of the table, scrolling through his tablet with one hand and holding a glass of orange juice with the other. Across from him, his wife, elegant in a gray dress, adjusted her bracelet and smiled as if every movement was being filmed. A quiet breakfast in a perfect home, or it should have been. Then came the whisper. A little black girl in a yellow hoodie leaned close to his ear. Her voice trembled, but her words cut through the air like glass. "Do not drink it," she said. She changed the medicine. The sound froze the room. The spoon in the sugar bowl stopped mid-air. Thomas blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. The girl's small hand gripped the table edge, her knuckles white against the polished wood. Behind them, the woman in gray went still, her smile fading, her eyes darting toward the counter where a small bottle of pills sat beside the orange juice. "What did you say?" Thomas asked slowly, his voice low, more afraid of the answer than of the accusation itself. The girl's lips barely moved. "She switched your medicine last night. I saw her." A silence heavier than any shout filled the kitchen. Outside, a bird tapped at the window, but even that sound seemed too loud. Thomas stared at the girl, confusion clouding his face, then turned toward his wife. "Evelyn?" he said, his voice caught between disbelief and anger. She laughed softly, too quickly. "Oh, Thomas. For heaven's sake. She must have been dreaming. Maybe she watched one of those detective shows again. Sweetheart, you should not frighten people like that." But the girl did not back away. Her dark eyes stayed on the man's face. She lifted a small flash drive from her pocket, its silver edge glinting in the sunlight. "It is all here," she whispered. "You need to see it." Evelyn's hand tightened on the back of the chair. "Thomas, she is a child," she said sharply, but her voice cracked. The billionaire's breathing changed. A faint tremor ran through his hand as he set the glass of juice down. He looked again at the little girl who stood so still, as if the world had stopped moving just for her words. "Where did you get that?" he asked. Her voice was steady now. "From the security camera in your study." For a moment, no one moved. The girl's whisper seemed to echo through the walls, through the quiet hum of wealth and comfort that filled that house. And in that silence, something shifted inside Thomas Reed. He realized that the smallest voice in the room had just cracked open his entire world. The orange juice on the table glowed bright in the sunlight, untouched. The orange juice on the table glowed untouched, its surface trembling slightly under the hum of the refrigerator. Thomas Reed sat back in his chair, the room still echoing with the little girl's whisper. The world outside continued as if nothing had happened, but inside the marble kitchen, time had slowed to the pulse of disbelief. Evelyn Reed was the first to move. She stepped closer, her heels clicking sharply against the tile. "Thomas," she said, forcing a calm smile. "Please, this is ridiculous. She is a child. You cannot take this seriously." Her tone was light, but her eyes darted toward the flash drive that rested on the table. The girl's small hand still hovered near it, as if she would not let it go. Thomas's voice came out quiet, almost detached. "Where did you get that camera footage exactly?" "In your study," the girl answered, her voice soft but firm. "You told me last week that the cameras were there for safety." Evelyn gave a short laugh that sounded too loud for the still room. "She must be mistaken. Thomas, listen to yourself. This child, what is your name again?" The girl straightened her shoulders. "My name is Amara." Evelyn folded her arms. "Amara, you must have misunderstood what you saw. You are not allowed in the private areas of the house. You probably—" "I did not misunderstand," Amara interrupted. "I saw you open the bottle, pour something from a white packet, and then seal it again. I recorded it because I was scared." Evelyn's mouth opened, then shut again. Her skin had gone pale under her makeup. "This is nonsense," she said finally. "Thomas, do not let a child's imagination ruin your morning." But Thomas was not listening to her anymore. His gaze had dropped to the flash drive. He reached for it slowly, his hand shaking. The silver metal was warm from Amara's palm. "You said this came from the camera in my study?" he asked again, as if repeating it would make sense of everything. Amara nodded. Her braids brushed her shoulders. "Yes, sir. The timestamp says last night at 11:32. Evelyn laughed again, brittle and dry. "You see?" 11:32. You were with me at that time, Thomas. We were reviewing the presentation for the foundation event. Do you remember? Thomas looked at her, really looked. Her expression was poised, but her fingers twitched slightly as she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The detail caught him like a thread pulling loose from a perfect suit, something small, but undeniable. Play it, he said. Evelyn's composure cracked. Thomas, no. You cannot trust something that a child brings you. You have no idea what kind of editing. Play it, he repeated. His tone was low, the kind that did not raise its voice because it did not need to. Amara hesitated for a second, then plugged the flash drive into the tablet. The screen lit up with a faint blue glow. The camera angle was grainy but clear enough. The study appeared first dim light, shelves of books, and the desk where Thomas signed contracts worth billions. In the footage, Evelyn walked into the frame wearing the same robe she had worn the night before. She opened a drawer, pulled out the pill bottle, and unscrewed the cap. Then, from her pocket, she shook out a small white packet and poured it inside. Her movements were quick, practiced. Thomas leaned forward, his breath uneven. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the tablet speaker. When the video ended, he exhaled slowly and set the device down as if it burned. Evelyn took a step toward him. Thomas, that is not what it looks like. He held up a hand. Do not say another word. His voice had dropped to a whisper. Not yet. Amara stayed quiet, her eyes lowered. She did not gloat, did not speak. She looked tired, small, but certain. Evelyn turned toward her, anger flashing now. You do not understand what you have done, little girl. You think you are helping, but you are causing harm. Thomas rose from his chair. The movement was slow, deliberate. He towered over both of them. But his eyes were not on his wife. They were on the glass of orange juice that still sat in front of him. Why? He asked softly, almost to himself. Why would you do this? Evelyn's lip trembled. You have been distant for months, Thomas. You do not even notice when I am in pain. I only wanted you to rest. The new medicine was stronger. It would have helped you sleep. He looked at her for a long time, searching for truth in the words, but all he found was fear. He turned to Amara. How did you know? I saw the powder in the sink after she left, Amara said. It smelled different from your medicine. My grandma used to work in a pharmacy. She told me to always check what people give you. So I checked. Thomas rubbed a hand over his face, exhaustion flooding him. You should not have had to do that, he said quietly. You should not have been the one to notice. Amara looked up. Someone had to. The words landed with a weight that neither of them could ignore. Thomas took a deep breath, steadying himself. Go to the living room, Amara, he said gently. Wait for me there. She hesitated, then nodded and walked toward the doorway. Her small footsteps echoed softly across the tile. When she was gone, the air shifted. Evelyn reached for him, but he stepped back. The glass of orange juice still sat untouched between them, bright and silent. Thomas stared at it for a long time, then finally whispered, You almost made me drink it. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. I never meant to hurt you, she said. He did not answer. The sound of Amara's quiet footsteps faded down the hall, and Thomas realized that sometimes the smallest voice in the room carries the only truth worth hearing. The sound of the closing door lingered after Amara left the kitchen. Thomas Reed stood motionless, the weight of the truth pressing against his chest like the humidity before a storm. The glass of orange juice still sat on the table, glowing under the morning light, a silent witness to everything that had just happened. His wife, Evelyn, sat across from him now, her face pale, her hands folded too neatly in her lap. Thomas broke the silence first. You lied to me, he said quietly. You looked me in the eyes and told me nothing was wrong. Evelyn swallowed hard. Thomas, please. I only wanted to help. The medicine you take, it makes you weak. You barely sleep. You barely eat. I was trying to fix it. By switching my prescription with something unknown. His voice cracked but did not rise. You were willing to poison me for sleep? Her voice trembled. It was not poison. Then what was it? He asked. Evelyn hesitated. A sedative. One I used before. I wanted peace in this house again. Thomas stared at her for a long moment. He felt both anger and pity fighting inside him. The woman before him looked smaller than he remembered, like a version of herself caught in a lie that had outgrown her. From the hallway came the faint sound of Amara's footsteps as she paced nervously in the living room. She could hear voices but not the words. She stood by the edge of a glass coffee table, twisting the strap of her backpack in her hands. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that comes before someone cries or shouts. Thomas finally spoke again, each word careful. "You have built your life on appearances, Evelyn, but truth does not care for appearances. It always finds a way out." Evelyn wiped at her cheek, smearing her mascara. "I loved you, Thomas. I still do." He nodded slowly. "And yet you almost ended me." She opened her mouth but could not find another defense. Thomas turned away from her and walked toward the living room. His shoes echoed against the marble floor, steady, deliberate. When he entered, Amara was sitting on the edge of the couch, her small feet barely touching the ground. She looked up, her face tense. "Are you angry with me?" she asked. He stopped in front of her. "No, Amara," he said softly. "You did what was right." She lowered her eyes. "I did not want to make trouble. I did not want you to get hurt." Thomas sat beside her, his large frame shrinking somehow beside her smallness. "You saved my life," he said. "That is not trouble." "Ugh." Amara looked at the carpet. "She will hate me now," he exhaled. "Sometimes telling the truth means someone will be angry. But you did not lie, and that matters." For a moment, the two sat in silence. The ticking clock on the wall filled the space between them. "Can I show you something?" Amara asked suddenly. He nodded. She opened her backpack and took out a folded piece of paper. It was a handwritten note, edges worn, with a child's careful penmanship. She handed it to him. "It is from your daughter. She gave it to me a long time ago at the hospital." Thomas's hand froze. He unfolded the paper slowly. The handwriting was unmistakable, his daughter Lily's. The words were simple. "If Dad ever forgets to listen, remind him that truth never shouts. It whispers." His throat tightened. "She wrote this for you?" Amara nodded. "She said her dad was always busy, but he was kind inside. She told me you like quiet mornings and that you do not like people pretending around you." He stared at the paper until the lines blurred through his tears. "You knew her?" "Yes," Amara said softly. "She was my nurse at the clinic. She helped me when I was sick. She told me to always be brave, even when people tell me to stay quiet." Thomas's hands trembled slightly. The connection between this child and his lost daughter wrapped around him like a thread he had not known was missing. He leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. "She would have liked you," he whispered. Amara's voice was barely audible. "She said you would not believe me easily, but that one day you would have to." Thomas nodded slowly, still holding the note. "You were right to show me." From the kitchen came a faint sound, Evelyn clearing her throat, trying to regain control. "Thomas, please," she called. "Can we talk about this calmly?" He looked toward the sound, his expression cold. "There is nothing left to discuss." Evelyn stepped into the doorway, her eyes red. "If you tell anyone about this, it will ruin everything. The company, the foundation, our reputation." "Our reputation?" Thomas repeated. "Evelyn, a reputation built on lies collapses the moment someone whispers the truth. Amara has done more for this family in one morning than either of us have done in years." Amara stood up, uncertain. "Should I go?" she asked. Thomas shook his head. "No, stay." He turned toward his wife. "If you have something left to say, say it, but do not speak to her again." Evelyn's shoulders sagged. She looked around as if searching for an escape, but there was none. She turned and left without another word, her heels echoing down the hallway. Thomas watched her go, then turned back to Amara. "Do you know what you did today?" he asked. She frowned slightly. "I told the truth." He smiled sadly. "Yes, and sometimes, that is the bravest thing a person can do." The morning light shifted across the room, landing on the folded note in his hand. For the first time in years, Thomas Reed felt something break open inside him, not despair, but clarity. He looked at Amara and said, "You can stay here for now. You are safe." She nodded, her shoulders relaxing slightly. Outside, The sound of birds returned. The house, once filled with lies, felt almost peaceful again, and on the coffee table, the small note between them whispered the same truth that had just saved his life. Truth never shouts. It whispers. The afternoon light faded slowly across the wide windows of the Reed estate. Hours had passed since the confrontation in the kitchen, but the silence in the house still felt heavy, like the air before a summer storm. Thomas Reed sat in his study now, his elbows on the desk, his hands folded beneath his chin. The small folded note from his daughter lay in front of him, its edges slightly curled. He had read it over and over until he could see the words even with his eyes closed. Outside the door, Amara stood quietly, unsure if she should knock. She had been waiting on the stairs for what felt like forever. Her stomach growled softly, but she ignored it. The echo of voices, the sound of glass breaking, and the image of the billionaire's face when he saw the video replayed in her mind again and again. She wondered if she had done too much, or not enough. When she finally tapped on the door, the sound was barely a whisper. "Mr. Reed?" she said softly. "Can I come in?" Thomas lifted his head. His voice was tired but gentle. "Yes, Amara, come in." She stepped into the study, the same room from the video. The desk was now cleared except for the note, a lamp, and a framed picture of a smiling young woman holding a stethoscope, his daughter, Lily. Amara stopped when she saw it. "She was the one who helped me," she said quietly. "She used to tell me that people who listen with their hearts can hear things others miss." Thomas turned the photo toward her. "She said that often," he replied. "I used to laugh at her for being too sentimental. I thought truth only belonged in facts and numbers. But today, you reminded me that truth has a voice." Amara smiled faintly. Lily believed that small things can save people. Thomas leaned back in his chair. She was right. He gestured to the seat across from him. "Sit down, Amara. You must be tired." She shook her head. "I can stand." He studied her, the way she held herself, small, careful, but steady. "You remind me of her," he said quietly. "Brave, even when you are scared." Amara hesitated. "I was scared. I thought you would not believe me." He sighed deeply. "At first, I did not. I have spent years surrounded by people who lie politely. I forgot what honesty sounds like." The girl looked down at her shoes. "It is not always easy to tell the truth. Sometimes people get mad. My grandma used to say that telling the truth can make the world shake a little, but it always settles in the right place." Thomas smiled sadly. "Your grandmother sounds wise." "She is," Amara said. "She works at the community clinic. She said Lily used to volunteer there before she got sick." Thomas's eyes softened. "Yes, she did. She loved that place." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of a distant clock filled the air, calm and steady. Then Thomas asked, "Do you have someone to go home to tonight?" Amara hesitated before answering. "My grandma's shift ends late. I can stay outside and wait until she comes back. It is not far." Thomas frowned. "You walked here this morning, did you not?" She nodded. "It was not bad. Only 3 blocks. That is still too far for a child to walk alone after dark," he said firmly. "You will stay here tonight. The guest room upstairs is empty. You will be safe there." Amara looked surprised. "I do not want to cause trouble." He shook his head. "You are not causing trouble, Amara. You saved me. The least I can do is give you a place to rest." She hesitated, then whispered, "Thank you, Mr. Reed." He stood and walked to the door. "Come, I will show you." As they walked through the long hallway, the house felt different. It was still large, still filled with polished floors and quiet art, but now there was a softness in the way the light moved across the walls. When they reached the guest room, Thomas opened the door. The room was simple, with white curtains and a bed covered in a pale blue blanket. Amara's eyes widened. "It is beautiful," she said. "It is peaceful," Thomas replied. "I have not opened this room in years." She placed her backpack on the chair. "Who used to stay here?" He hesitated. "Lily, when she came home from college. I kept it the same." Amara looked around again, her fingers brushing the frame of a small painting on the wall. "She liked blue," she said. Thomas nodded. "She did. How did you know?" "She told me once," Amara said softly. "She said blue makes her think of calm, even when things hurt." For a moment, Thomas could not speak. The room felt filled with her presence again, not just in the objects she left behind, but in the kindness she had planted in this child. "Rest here tonight," he said finally. "If you need anything, the kitchen is down the hall. I will be in the study." Amara nodded. "Good night, Mr. Reed." "Good night, Amara." He turned to leave, but before he closed the door, she spoke again. "Mr. Reed?" "Yes? Do you think she knows what happened today?" He paused, his hand on the doorframe. "I think she does," he said softly, "and I think she is proud of you." Amara smiled, small but real. "She was proud of you too," she said. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded and closed the door gently. As Thomas walked back to his study, the weight on his chest began to ease. The house no longer felt like a museum of loss. It felt like a place where truth had finally entered and decided to stay. Down the hall, Amara sat on the edge of the bed, the pale blue blanket gathered in her hands. She whispered to the quiet room, "Good night, Lily," before lying down. For the first time in years, the Reed house slept in peace. The morning sun slipped gently through the white curtains of the guest room. Amara stirred, the soft light brushing across her face. For a moment she did not remember where she was. The scent of clean linen and the faint ticking of a clock reminded her that this was not her small room at her grandmother's apartment. This was the house of Thomas Reed, the man whose life she had saved the day before. She sat up slowly, clutching the edge of the blue blanket that still carried traces of Lily's memory. A few birds chirped outside the window, and the sound filled the room with a fragile kind of hope. Amara swung her legs off the bed and stood quietly. The floor beneath her feet was cool, smooth marble, far different from the worn tiles she was used to. She felt both safe and out of place at the same time. Downstairs, Thomas sat at the kitchen table, the same place where everything had changed. The glass of orange juice was gone. In its place sat a cup of black coffee and a small plate of toast. He had barely touched either. His mind drifted between the events of yesterday and the strange calm of this morning. Evelyn had left before dawn. She had said nothing except a quiet, trembling apology. Her car's tires had whispered across the gravel driveway, fading into silence. When Amara entered the kitchen, Thomas looked up. The lines around his eyes were deeper, but his expression was softer. "Good morning, Amara," he said. "Good morning, Mr. Reed," she replied, her voice polite and careful. He nodded toward the chair opposite him. "Sit, please. You must be hungry." She hesitated, then took the seat. On the table, a small bowl of fruit and a plate of scrambled eggs waited for her. "You did not have to make breakfast," she said. "I did not," he replied. "The housekeeper came early. She wanted to thank you." Amara looked surprised. "Thank me? For what?" "For being brave," Thomas said simply. "Most adults would not have done what you did." Amara took a bite of the eggs, chewing slowly. "My grandma says courage is not loud. It is just doing the right thing even when your voice shakes." Thomas smiled faintly. "Your grandmother sounds like someone I should meet." "You would like her," Amara said. "She tells the truth even when people do not want to hear it." He nodded thoughtfully. "That seems to run in your family." For a few quiet moments they ate, the only sound the clinking of forks against plates. Then Thomas spoke again. "Amara, I would like to ask you something." She looked up, curious. "What is it?" He folded his hands. "When you told me the truth yesterday, you risked a lot. You could have stayed silent. Why did you not?" Amara thought for a long time before answering. "Because Lily told me once that silence can hurt more than words. She said if I ever saw something wrong and said nothing, it would stay in my heart like a stone." Thomas nodded slowly. "That sounds exactly like her." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the folded note again. "This letter," he said, "was written by her for you, but it saved me instead." Amara smiled softly. Maybe she wanted it that way. He set the note on the table between them. "She always believed that kindness could change people. I think she was right." Amara hesitated, then asked, "What will you do now, Mr. Reed?" Thomas looked toward the wide window, where sunlight spilled across the marble floor. "I will fix what has been broken," he said. "Not just in this house, but in the company, in the foundation, in myself. I built everything on control, but control without truth is only a cage." Amara tilted her head. Will you tell people what happened? I will tell what matters, he replied. The rest will come out in time. He stood and walked to the counter, pouring a second cup of coffee. Would you like to see something? He asked. She nodded. He led her into his study again. The air smelled faintly of old books and cedar. On the desk were stacks of papers, a family photo, and the same tablet that had played the video the day before. He tapped the screen and turned it toward her. I want you to watch this. The video was short. It showed a clip from the security camera in the hallway outside the study, recorded just after the confrontation. In it, Evelyn stood alone, crying quietly, before walking away. Thomas paused the video and looked at Amara. People make mistakes, he said. Some of them cannot be undone, but forgiveness does not mean forgetting. It means choosing peace. Amara looked at the frozen image on the screen. Will you forgive her? She asked. He sighed. Not yet, but I will try. She nodded slowly. That is what my grandma says too. Forgiving is like cleaning a wound. It hurts first, but then it helps you heal. Thomas smiled for the first time that morning. Your grandmother sounds like a remarkable woman. Amara smiled back. She is. She helps people who have nothing. He leaned against the desk. And what about you, Amara? What do you want to be when you grow up? She thought for a moment. I want to be someone who listens, she said. Maybe a nurse like Lily, or maybe a teacher, someone who makes people feel safe. Thomas nodded. That is a good dream. They stood in silence for a while, the hum of the house filling the background. Then Thomas said quietly, I will make sure you and your grandmother have everything you need, not as a debt, but as gratitude. You deserve a better chance. Amara's eyes widened. You do not have to do that. I know, he said gently, but I want to. She smiled, shy but sincere. Thank you, Mr. Reed. He looked at her with quiet respect. No, Amara, thank you. Outside, the sunlight brightened, reaching through the glass and lighting the room in a soft golden glow. The note on the desk fluttered slightly in the breeze from the open window, its words catching the light. For the first time in years, Thomas Reed felt the weight of truth not as a burden, but as a gift one given by the smallest, bravest voice in his house. The next morning arrived quietly, wrapped in the soft hum of distant city traffic and the smell of fresh rain on the pavement. The Reed mansion stood still, as if trying to remember how to breathe after so many years of holding its silence. Thomas Reed sat by the living room window, watching the gray clouds drift apart, revealing streaks of gold sunlight. He had not slept much, but for the first time in years, his sleeplessness did not feel like a burden. Upstairs, the guest room door creaked open. Amara stepped out, her small figure framed by the soft morning light. She wore the same yellow hoodie, now neatly washed and folded from the night before. Her hair was tied into two small braids, still slightly uneven but full of personality. She walked down the stairs slowly, her sneakers barely making a sound on the marble. Thomas turned when he heard her. Good morning, Amara, he said. His voice carried a tired gentleness. Good morning, Mr. Reed, she replied. You are awake early. He smiled faintly. I have been awake since the rain stopped. The house sounds different after it rains. Quieter. More honest. Oh, Amara tilted her head slightly, unsure what that meant, but she nodded anyway. Would you like me to make tea? She asked politely. Thomas chuckled softly. That is very kind, but you are my guest. You do not need to do that. She looked at him with sincerity that only children possess. When I stay at my grandma's friend's house, I always help in the morning. It is good manners. He nodded, touched by her earnestness. Then let us make tea together. They walked to the kitchen. The counters gleamed, and the air smelled faintly of citrus cleaner. Thomas reached for the kettle, and Amara stood on her tiptoes to get the tea bags from a high shelf. She set them down carefully, proud of herself. Lily used to like chamomile tea, Thomas said as he filled the kettle. She said it makes the heart remember to slow down. Amara smiled. My grandma says the same thing. He looked at her curiously. Your grandmother and my daughter would have gotten along well. Maybe they still do, Amara said softly. My grandma says people we love do not really go away. They just change rooms. Thomas paused for a moment. The simple wisdom of her words, settling deep inside him. "That is a beautiful thought," he said quietly. The kettle began to whistle, breaking the silence. He poured the hot water into 2 cups and handed one to her. She cupped it carefully in both hands, feeling the warmth spread into her palms. As they sat at the table, Thomas glanced toward the hallway. Evelyn's voice did not echo there anymore. The house felt emptier, but also cleaner. He had arranged for her to stay with her sister for now. It was not revenge. It was space, a necessary distance between the truth and the damage that truth had exposed. Amara sipped her tea. "Will she come back?" she asked carefully. Thomas looked at the steam rising from his cup. "I do not know. Sometimes people have to leave before they understand what they have done." Amara nodded slowly. "When my dad left, my grandma said almost the same thing. She said sometimes love gets lost on the way home." He studied her for a long moment. "You have seen more than a child should," he said softly. "I have seen people try," she answered. "That is what matters." The truth in her words moved him more than he expected. He had spent decades surrounded by polished speeches, investors, and false promises. Yet here, across from him, was a little girl with messy braids and scraped sneakers, reminding him that integrity was not complicated, it was just rare. Thomas leaned back in his chair. "Amara," he said slowly, "I would like to visit your grandmother. I want to thank her in person for raising someone so brave." Her face lit up. "She would be happy to meet you, but she works long hours. The clinic closes late." That is all right," Thomas replied. "We can go when she finishes. I would like to see where you live." Amara hesitated. "It is not like your house," she said softly. "It is small and old." He smiled. "Then it must be full of real things." They shared a quiet laugh, the kind that warms a room more than sunlight ever could. Later that morning, while Thomas reviewed a few documents in his study, Amara wandered through the house. She stopped by the framed photo of Lily on the wall and whispered, "He is trying, you know. You would be proud." Then she smiled and kept walking. When Thomas found her again, she was sitting on the steps near the front door, sketching something in a small notebook. He sat beside her. "What are you drawing?" he asked. She turned the page toward him. It was a simple drawing of a cup and a note beside it. Beneath the drawing, she had written, "Truth never shouts. It whispers." He looked at the words and nodded slowly. "You are an artist too," he said. "I draw so I do not forget," Amara replied. "Sometimes memories fade, but pictures stay." Thomas placed a hand over his heart. "That is exactly what my daughter used to say." They sat there for a while, 2 souls bound by someone they both loved and by a truth that had nearly been buried. In the early afternoon, the phone rang. It was the clinic calling. Thomas listened as the voice on the other end thanked him for his message and said that Amara's grandmother would be free later that evening. He looked at the girl beside him and said, "Looks like we have plans tonight." Amara's eyes brightened. "Really? You are coming with me?" "Yes," he said with a smile. "I think it is time I saw the world through your side of town." Amara grinned, and in that moment the house felt alive again. That night, as the sun began to set behind the city skyline, Thomas Reed realized that the child who had once whispered to save his life was now teaching him how to live it again. And for the first time, he did not fear what truth would bring. He was ready to face it with open eyes, an open heart, and a cup of chamomile tea cooling beside him. The sky turned a deep gold as the sun began to sink behind the tall buildings. Thomas Reed stood at the edge of his driveway, waiting beside the black sedan that would take him and Amara across town. The air smelled faintly of rain and jasmine from the garden. He had not been this nervous in years, not even before major business meetings or public speeches. Tonight was different. Tonight, he was stepping out of the world he had built and into the world of the girl who had changed his life. Amara came down the front steps, holding a small drawing pad against her chest. She wore her yellow hoodie again, freshly washed and neatly zipped. "Are we really going to my neighborhood?" she asked, her voice both excited and uncertain. "Yes, we are," Thomas replied. "You said your grandmother's clinic is near West Maple Street, correct?" She nodded. "It is behind the grocery store with the big red sign. The roof leaks when it rains, but my grandma says it is still the best place to heal people." Thomas smiled. "Then that is where we will go." The car ride was quiet at first. The city outside changed from polished neighborhoods and tall glass buildings to narrow streets lined with old brick homes and murals painted by local artists. Amara pointed out places she recognized: the library where she used to read with Lily, the park where she had learned to ride her bike, the bus stop where her grandmother waited every morning. Thomas listened closely, absorbing each detail as if it were a language he was finally learning. When they arrived, the clinic looked modest but welcoming. The sign above the entrance read Maple Community Health Center. The paint had faded, but the words carried warmth. Inside, the walls were covered with children's drawings and handwritten thank you notes from patients. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant mixed with coffee. Amara's grandmother, Mrs. Carter, looked up from the reception desk. She was a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and silver streaks in her dark hair. When she saw Amara, her face lit up. "There you are, sweetheart," she said, walking around the counter to embrace her granddaughter. Amara smiled. "Grandma, this is Mr. Reed. He is the man I told you about." Mrs. Carter turned toward Thomas, her expression warm but guarded. "Mr. Reed," she said politely, "I have heard a lot about you." Thomas extended his hand. "And I have heard a lot about you, Mrs. Carter. I wanted to thank you in person for raising such a remarkable young girl." The older woman shook his hand firmly. "Amara has always had a strong sense of right and wrong," she said. "That came from her parents before life got hard, but I did my best to keep that light burning." "You succeeded," Thomas said sincerely. "She reminded me what truth sounds like." Mrs. Carter studied him for a moment, reading his face the way only wise people can. "It must not have been easy, hearing the truth from a child." Thomas nodded. "It was not. But it was exactly what I needed." The older woman smiled softly. "Then maybe my granddaughter was meant to be at the right place, at the right time." Amara tugged on her grandmother's sleeve. "Can I show Mr. Reed the garden in the back?" she asked. "Of course," Mrs. Carter said. "The tomatoes might impress him." The garden behind the clinic was small but full of life. Rows of green vines stretched along the fence, dotted with ripe red fruit. There were also patches of herbs and a few sunflowers leaning toward the evening light. Amara pointed proudly. "My grandma says plants listen to people when they talk kindly to them. That is why she grows medicine here. She says healing starts with kindness." Thomas knelt to examine one of the plants. "I think she is right," he said. "Even people grow better when someone believes in them." Amara smiled. "That is what Lily used to say too." He looked up, his expression soft. "You keep reminding me of her. She had that same belief in gentle strength." The two stood there for a while, watching the sunflowers sway in the breeze. Then Thomas spoke again. "Amara, I watched the video from the camera again this morning. I wanted to be sure I was not missing anything." Her face turned serious. "Did you find something else?" "I did," he said quietly. "At the end of the recording, there was a reflection in the glass of the study door. It showed you. You were crying." "Ugh." Amara looked down. "I was scared," she admitted. "I did not know if you would believe me, or if she would find out I saw." Thomas reached out, his voice steady and full of gratitude. "You were brave, even when you were scared. That kind of courage does not disappear. It changes the people who see it." Amara met his eyes. "I just wanted you to live." He smiled gently. "And because of you, I will." Mrs. Carter called from the back door. "Amara, the doctor is ready to lock up soon." Amara nodded. "Coming, Grandma." She turned to Thomas. "Will you come back again?" "I will," he said without hesitation. "If you and your grandmother will have me." She grinned. "We will always have room for you." As they walked back toward the front, Thomas felt something inside him ease, like a knot finally untying. The world outside the clinic was not perfect, but it was real. And for the first time, he wanted to be part of something real again. Before leaving, Mrs. Carter handed him a small jar of honey from the clinic garden. "For your tea," she said, "to remind you that sweetness can still come from humble places." Thomas took it with a grateful smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Carter." When the car pulled away, Amara waved from the doorway until it disappeared down the street. Inside the car, Thomas held the jar in his hands, thinking about the girl, her grandmother, and the truth that had saved him. He looked out the window at the fading city lights and whispered, "One small voice. One quiet truth. That is all it takes to start again." And somewhere behind him, at the clinic with the leaky roof and the blooming sunflowers, Amara whispered into the night, "Good night, Lily." He listened. The following morning dawned bright and still. The city woke slowly, its hum rising through the wide streets and open windows. Inside his study, Thomas Reed sat at his desk, the jar of honey from Mrs. Carter placed beside his coffee cup. The sunlight moved gently across the wood, catching on the golden glass. For the first time in years, the billionaire was not reading financial reports or emails. Instead, he was reading a simple letter he had begun to write by hand. He paused after every few lines, uncertain how to say what his heart already knew. The letter was meant for Evelyn, but the words were also for himself. He wrote about truth, about fear, about the way silence had built walls between them. He wrote that forgiveness would not come easily, but it would come honestly. The sound of light footsteps drew him from his thoughts. Amara stood in the doorway, holding her sketchbook. "Good morning, Mr. Reed," she said. He looked up and smiled. "Good morning, Amara. Did you sleep well?" "I did," she said. "I dreamed about the garden. My grandma said the sunflowers were going to bloom soon." They already looked ready to," Thomas said. "Maybe we will visit again this weekend." Her face brightened. "Can we bring Lily's note to put in the garden? I think she would like that." Thomas nodded slowly. "Yes, I think she would." For a moment, they stood in comfortable silence, the kind that exists between people who understand each other without needing to speak much. Then Amara asked, "Will you tell people what happened?" Thomas leaned back in his chair, his fingers tracing the edge of the letter. "Some of them already know. The truth has a way of traveling faster than we expect." Amara tilted her head. "Are they angry?" "Some are," he admitted. "But others are grateful. They think I was brave to expose what was wrong inside my company." "Were you scared?" she asked. "Yes," he said honestly. "But you taught me something, Amara. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is doing the right thing even when fear is standing right beside you." Amara smiled softly. "That is what my grandma says too." Later that morning, Thomas invited his board of directors to his home. The large meeting room that had once hosted investors and dignitaries now felt different. There were no fancy floral arrangements, no staged speeches, just truth waiting to be told. When everyone had taken their seats, Thomas stood at the head of the table. His voice was calm, clear, and steady. "Yesterday," he began, "I was saved by the truth. A young girl who had no reason to risk anything for me, spoke when no one else would. Because of her, I saw what I had refused to see: corruption within my own walls, and complacency within myself." The room fell silent. He continued, "I allowed comfort to blind me. But from this day forward, things will change. I am starting an internal review, and I will personally ensure that honesty, not power, guides our work." Several executives exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, a man in a gray suit, said carefully, "Mr. Reed, this could affect investor confidence." Thomas looked at him. "So be it," he replied. "If confidence must be bought with lies, then it is not worth having." The man fell silent. After the meeting, Thomas returned to the living room. Amara was there, drawing quietly on the couch. She looked up as he entered. "Did you tell them?" she asked. "Yes," he said, "and it felt right." "Did they believe you?" "Some did, some did not. But truth is not about who believes it. It stands even when no one listens." Amara nodded thoughtfully. "Like when you did not believe me at first." He smiled, his expression tinged with humility. "Exactly like that." That afternoon, a news alert appeared on his phone. A journalist had somehow learned about the internal investigation. Headlines began to spread. "Billionaire exposes corruption inside his own company." Photos of Thomas walking into the meeting circulated online. But it was the smaller story underneath that caught his eye. It read, "A little girl's courage changed the course of an empire." Thomas stared at the headline for a long time. He turned the phone toward Amara. "Look," he said quietly. Amara's eyes widened. "They wrote about me?" "Yes," he said, "but more importantly, They wrote about what you did. Uh, she frowned. Will people be mad? Some might be, he said. But most will be inspired. You reminded the world that truth does not need a microphone to be heard. It only needs a voice that refuses to stay silent. Amara smiled shyly. My grandma will laugh when she sees it. She always says I talk too much. Thomas chuckled. Then maybe talking too much saved us both. Evening came slowly. The lights of the city began to twinkle through the wide windows. Thomas brewed chamomile tea while Amara sketched by the fireplace. On her page, she drew the jar of honey, the garden, and a small house with light glowing in every window. Above it, she wrote, Kindness grows where truth is planted. Thomas leaned over to look at the drawing. That is beautiful, he said softly. Can I keep a copy? She grinned. I can draw another one for you. This one is for my grandma. He smiled. That is fair. Now, outside, rain began to fall again, tapping gently against the glass. Thomas felt a calm he had not known in years. He realized that redemption did not arrive through grand gestures or public apologies. It arrived through quiet mornings, honest words, and the unshakable kindness of a child. As Amara gathered her drawings, she looked up at him and said, Mr. Reed, do you think people can change for real? He met her gaze. Yes, Amara, people can change. They just need someone brave enough to tell them the truth. She nodded, satisfied with the answer. The clock struck 7, and the world outside shimmered under the rain. Inside, the warmth of truth lingered like the scent of tea and honey, soft and steady, reminding them both that sometimes the smallest voice can move mountains that power alone never could. The next day dawned with a pale, silver light spreading through the city. The rain had stopped during the night, leaving the streets washed clean. Inside the Reed mansion, the quiet hum of morning returned, but it no longer felt heavy. It felt awake. Thomas Reed sat in his study once again, the same room where his world had nearly collapsed only days ago. The framed photo of Lily stood beside the jar of honey, both bathed in sunlight. The morning news played softly on a small television in the corner. Reporters were still talking about his company's investigation, and now, about the little girl who had exposed the truth. He listened without moving, his thoughts somewhere else. The public praise did not bring pride. It brought reflection. He knew the world saw a powerful man who had corrected his mistake, but only he knew that it was a child's courage, not his own, that had brought redemption into his life. The sound of small footsteps interrupted his thoughts. Amara entered the study holding 2 mugs of tea. Chamomile again, she said proudly. I made it myself this time, Thomas smiled. Then it will be perfect. She handed him a mug and sat on the chair across from him. Her braids were tied with blue ribbons today. My grandma says you are famous now, she said. She saw your name on the news again. I suppose that is true, he said with a tired smile. But fame does not matter much to me anymore. Amara tilted her heel. Then what matters? He looked at her seriously. Doing what is right when it is hard. That matters. And making sure people like you are protected when they speak the truth. Amara thought about that. Some people at school do not tell the truth because they are scared. Sometimes they see bad things, but they stay quiet. Thomas nodded. That happens to adults too. Fear can silence anyone. Then maybe we should make a place where people can talk, Amara said, like a safe corner for truth. Oh, he looked at her, surprised by the simplicity of her words. A safe corner for truth, he repeated softly. That is a powerful idea. Later that afternoon, Thomas attended a press conference. He had avoided public appearances for years, but today he stood before the cameras willingly. Reporters filled the room, eager for answers. When it was his turn to speak, Thomas adjusted the microphone. A few days ago, he began, a little girl saved my life. She saw something wrong and refused to stay silent. Because of her, I discovered deceit inside my own company and within my own home. The truth was not loud or dramatic. It was a whisper, but it was enough to wake me. The cameras clicked rapidly. Some people nodded, others simply listened. I have learned that power means nothing if it is not guided by integrity, Thomas continued. So today, I am announcing a new foundation called the Whisper Project. It will protect and support children who speak up when they see wrongs, children who believe their voices can bring change, because they can. The room erupted in applause. Flashing lights filled his eyes, but he did not flinch. He felt calm, grounded. When the conference ended, he slipped quietly out a side door where Amara and Mrs. Carter waited. Amara ran up to him. "They clapped for you," she said, her face glowing. "They clapped for us," he corrected gently. "The truth does not belong to one person. It belongs to everyone brave enough to carry it." Mrs. Carter placed a hand on his arm. "What you are doing, Mr. Reed, it will help more children than you can imagine." "I hope so," he said sincerely. "But I also hope it helps adults remember what courage looks like." They left the building together, stepping into the cool afternoon. The city looked different now, more alive, more human. Back at the mansion, Thomas and Amara spent the evening in the living room. He had placed a notebook on the coffee table. The first page labeled "Ideas for the Whisper Project." Amara flipped through the blank pages eagerly. "We can have drawings, and stories, and a wall where people can write what truth means to them," she said. Thomas nodded, writing down her ideas carefully. "And scholarships," he added. "For children who have the courage to tell the truth even when it costs them something." Amara grinned. "We will help everyone." He smiled, one voice at a time. As the night deepened, the mansion grew quiet again. The fire crackled softly, and Amara's pencil scratched across the notebook as she drew. When she turned the page toward him, it showed a picture of two figures, one tall and one small, standing beneath a glowing light. Above them were the words, "Truth heals." Thomas looked at the drawing for a long moment. "You have captured everything," he said quietly. Amara smiled shyly. "Lily would like it too." He nodded, his voice thick with emotion. Yes, she would. The clock on the wall struck 9. Mrs. Carter had fallen asleep on the couch, a blanket draped over her shoulders. Amara leaned against the armchair, fighting her own sleepiness. Thomas rose and gently took the notebook from her hands. "Go on," he said softly. "Time for bed." She looked up at him through heavy eyes. "Mr. Reed, can I ask one more question?" "Of course." Are you happy now?" He paused, surprised by the question. Then he smiled. "Yes, Amara. For the first time in a long while, I am truly happy." She nodded, satisfied, and drifted off to sleep. Thomas stood there for a long moment, watching the quiet room, the notebook filled with her drawings, and the child who had brought light back into his life. He whispered to himself, "Truth does not destroy, it rebuilds." Outside, the city lights shimmered across the horizon, and for the first time since Lily's death, Thomas Reed felt that his world was whole again, not perfect, but honest. And honesty, he realized, was the only foundation strong enough to last forever. The following morning began with the steady hum of rain against the windows. The sky outside was soft gray, the kind of weather that made the world slow down. Thomas Reed stood at the large window in his study, watching the droplets trace delicate paths down the glass. The events of the last few days had changed everything: his home, his company, and his heart. Yet even as the truth settled in, he felt that his life was still rearranging itself, piece by piece. Down the hall, the faint sound of laughter reached him. Amara was awake, her bright voice echoing through the quiet house. She was talking to Mrs. Carter in the kitchen, her words full of energy and innocence. It was a sound Thomas had not heard in his home for years, a child's laughter, genuine and alive. It made the walls feel warmer. He walked toward the kitchen and paused at the doorway. Amara stood on a small stool, stirring pancake batter in a glass bowl. Mrs. Carter stood beside her, flipping one pancake carefully on the stove. The smell of butter and vanilla filled the air. Thomas smiled. "It seems I am interrupting breakfast in progress." Amara looked up at him proudly. "We are making pancakes with honey, just like the jar you got from the clinic garden." "That sounds wonderful," he said, stepping inside. "May I help?" Mrs. Carter laughed. "You can help by sitting down and letting us feed you. That seems fair." He obeyed, taking a seat at the table. As the pancakes cooked, Amara chatted about her dreams. "I want to help you with the Whisper Project," she said. "I can draw pictures for the walls. Maybe one with people holding hands, like truth connecting them." Thomas nodded. "That is a beautiful idea. We will use your drawings as the first display when we open our office." Amara grinned, delighted. Then it will not be scary for children to come. They will know it is made for them. When breakfast was ready, they sat together. The pancakes were golden and soft, drizzled with honey from the jar. Thomas tasted them and smiled. "These are perfect," he said. Amara looked proud. "It is the honey that makes it special." Mrs. Carter chuckled. "It is more than the honey, dear. It is love." After breakfast, Thomas received a call. The police department wanted to meet with him regarding the ongoing investigation into the medication fraud. He knew what that meant. It was time for Evelyn to face the consequences of her choices. The thought made his chest tighten, but he knew he could not avoid it. A few hours later, he arrived at the police station. The air inside was cool and sterile, filled with the quiet murmur of officers and the click of keyboards. In a small interview room, Evelyn sat across from him. She looked different now, tired, remorseful. Her hair pulled back neatly but without effort. "Thomas," she said softly, "I did not think you would come." He sat down across from her. "I had to," he said. "There are things that need to be said." Evelyn nodded slowly. "I do not expect forgiveness. I only wanted to explain." "Then explain," he said quietly. Tears filled her eyes as she spoke. "When Lily died, something in me broke. I blamed myself, and I blamed you. I thought if I could control everything, your health, your work, your life, I could keep from losing anything else. But instead, I lost myself." Thomas listened in silence. For the first time, he saw her not as the woman who betrayed him, but as someone drowning in her own grief. "I was wrong," she continued. "You have every right to hate me, but please believe me, I never wanted to hurt you." He sighed, the sound heavy but calm. "I do not hate you, Evelyn. Hate would mean I still carry anger. I let that go. What I feel now is sadness for what we lost, and for what truth had to destroy to set us free." She wiped her tears. "You sound like Lily." He managed a faint smile. Maybe her words finally caught up with me. They sat in silence for a moment before he stood. "You will have to face the consequences, Evelyn, but I hope you will also find healing. We both need it." She nodded, her shoulders trembling. "Thank you for coming." When Thomas left the station, the air outside felt lighter. The rain had stopped, and sunlight broke through the clouds. He took a long breath and looked up at the sky. For the first time in years, he felt peace that was not borrowed, it was his own. That evening, when he returned home, Amara ran to meet him at the door. "Mr. Reed, look," she said excitedly. She held up one of her drawings. It showed 3 figures standing beneath a tree, an older man, a young girl, and a woman looking toward the sky. The words at the bottom read, "Forgiveness grows where truth is planted." Thomas knelt beside her, his voice full of warmth. "That is beautiful, Amara. What made you draw it?" "I thought about you and Lily and Mrs. Reed," she said simply. "My grandma says forgiveness is not saying it was okay. It is saying you want peace more than pain." He looked at her with quiet admiration. "Your grandmother is right." Mrs. Carter entered the hallway, smiling softly. "Children see things clearly, Mr. Reed. They remind us of the lessons we forget." He nodded. "They do." Later that night, as the house grew still, Thomas sat alone in his study. The photo of Lily seemed to glow softly in the lamplight. He whispered, "I have forgiven her, Lily. I think you would want that." Outside, the first stars appeared through the thinning clouds. Upstairs, Amara slept soundly, her drawings spread across the desk beside her bed. Thomas closed his eyes and let the peace settle deep inside him. The truth had stripped away everything false, but in its place, it had given him something stronger: clarity, compassion, and the courage to begin again. And in the silence that followed, he understood that redemption was not a single act. It was a quiet choice, made every morning, to live honestly, to listen kindly, and to keep believing that even broken things could bloom again. The next morning rose golden and clear, painting soft light across the polished floor of the Reed mansion. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind air that smelled of fresh earth and new beginnings. Thomas Reed stood in the front garden, the one Lily had planted years ago, where wild roses grew along the white stone path. He bent to touch a single bloom, its petals trembling gently in the breeze. Inside, Amara and Mrs. Carter were finishing breakfast. The house was alive again, quiet, but not empty. The voices that once echoed with tension now carried warmth and laughter. Amara looked up when Thomas walked in. "Mr. Reed, the news said people are talking about the Whisper Project. They want to help." He smiled, setting down his jacket. "That is good news. The more voices, the stronger the message." "Mrs. Carter nodded. "You are giving people hope, Mr. Reed. Not just for justice, but for healing. That is a rare kind of gift." Thomas looked at her gratefully. "It was Amara who started this, not me. She reminded me what truth feels like when it is spoken without fear." Amara grinned shyly. "I just wanted people to listen. And they are listening," he said. "Because of you." Later that afternoon, Thomas invited a small group of journalists and educators to his home to share the foundation's first plans. He wanted to make it simple, no press lights, no scripts, just honesty. The meeting took place in the library, the same room that had once felt suffocating with silence. Now, sunlight streamed in through the tall windows, turning the air golden. As the guests settled in, Thomas stood at the front. Amara sat quietly beside Mrs. Carter, her feet swinging above the floor. He began to speak, his voice steady and calm. "Months ago, I believed my life was built on success," he said. "I had everything: power, wealth, and respect. But I learned that when truth is missing, even the grandest life becomes hollow. I learned that from a child." He looked at Amara, and she smiled, her hands folded neatly on her lap. "She spoke when everyone else was silent," he continued. "And because of that, lives were saved, corruption was exposed, and one very stubborn man was reminded that integrity cannot be bought, it must be lived." The room was still. A few people wiped away tears. Thomas paused for a moment, then said, "The Whisper Project will begin here, in this city. Its purpose is to give children a safe space to speak the truth, to protect them, and to teach adults to listen." Mrs. Carter raised her hand gently. "Mr. Reed," she said, "may I ask, what will happen to those who try to silence these children?" Thomas answered firmly, "We will stand with them. No voice will be buried again under fear." After the meeting, as the guests left, one reporter stayed behind. She was a young woman with kind eyes and a notepad filled with notes. "Mr. Reed," she said quietly, "the world rarely hears about children like Amara. How do you plan to tell her story without turning it into something tragic?" Thomas glanced toward Amara, who was drawing by the window. "By telling it truthfully," he said. "Not as a story of pity, but of power. She is not a victim. She is a voice." The reporter nodded with respect and thanked him before leaving. When the house grew quiet again, Amara looked up from her drawing. "Did I do good today?" she asked. Thomas smiled. "You did more than good. You reminded grown-ups that courage does not need to shout." Amara giggled. "That is what Lily said in her note." "Yes," Thomas said softly. "And I think she meant for you to remind me of that." That evening, the three of them, Thomas, Amara, and Mrs. Carter, sat on the back porch watching the sun set over the garden. The sky glowed with streaks of pink and orange, reflecting off the small pond at the edge of the yard. A gentle wind rustled the roses. Mrs. Carter leaned back in her chair. "You know, Mr. Reed, not everyone gets a second chance to do something meaningful with their life. You have one now. Do not waste it." He nodded slowly. "I will not." Amara pointed toward the horizon. "It looks like the sky is smiling," she said. Thomas followed her gaze. "Maybe it is," he said. "Maybe the world smiles when people finally make peace with the truth." Mrs. Carter smiled. "That sounds like something Lily would have said." Thomas felt a lump form in his throat. "It does," he whispered. She would have loved this moment. Amara reached for the folded piece of paper she always carried, the note from Lily. She held it out to him. "You should keep it now," she said. He looked at her, touched. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "She wrote it for both of us, I think." Thomas unfolded the note and read the familiar words once more. "If Dad ever forgets to listen, remind him that truth never shouts. It whispers." He smiled through the tears in his eyes. "She is still teaching me." Amara rested her head on his arm. "Then maybe you are listening now." "I am," he said softly. "More than ever." As night settled in, the air filled with the sound of crickets and distant city lights flickering on. Thomas realized that for the first time in a long while, There was nothing left to hide, nothing left to fear. Truth had stripped his life bare. But in that emptiness, he had found meaning again. He looked at Amara, her small face calm and full of light, and said quietly, "You saved more than my life, Amara. You saved who I was supposed to be." She smiled sleepily. "You saved yourself too, Mr. Reed." Ebly. And with that, the little girl who had once whispered a warning closed her eyes, her head resting on his shoulder, while the man who had built an empire sat perfectly still, grateful that one brave whisper had brought him back to what truly mattered: honesty, forgiveness, and the gentle grace of starting over. The morning sun rose soft and golden over the Reed mansion. Dew still clung to the garden roses as light spilled across the wide kitchen windows. Thomas Reed stood at the counter, pouring 2 cups of tea, one for himself and one for Amara. The house felt peaceful, almost sacred, as if every corner now carried the quiet rhythm of forgiveness. Amara entered the kitchen, rubbing her eyes, her yellow hoodie zipped halfway. "Good morning, Mr. Reed," she said with a small smile. "Good morning, Amara," he replied, handing her the cup. "Chamomile again," she nodded. "It helps me think. Grandma says tea makes thoughts come out gentle." "Daxton," Thomas smiled. "Your grandmother is a wise woman." They sat at the table together, sipping quietly. The morning calm reminded him of something he had not felt in years: belonging. Across from him sat the little girl who had become the center of his redemption, and around them, the echoes of Lily's kindness seemed to breathe through the walls. After a while, Amara set her cup down. "Mr. Reed, what will happen to the Whisper Project now?" she asked. He leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. "It is growing. The city council has offered space downtown for us to build a community center. It will have a classroom, a small art room, and a library where children can write or draw about truth. I want it to be a place where honesty feels safe." Amara's eyes brightened. "Can I help paint the walls?" "Of course," he said. "You started it after all. It would not be right without your touch." She smiled proudly. "Then I will draw something beautiful." Later that morning, Mrs. Carter arrived, carrying a basket of fresh herbs from the clinic garden. "Good morning, you two," she said, her voice warm. "The city looks alive today. People are talking about your foundation everywhere." Thomas smiled modestly. "I am glad. I only hope it becomes something lasting." Mrs. Carter placed a gentle hand on his arm. "It will. You planted it with truth, not pride. That kind of seed always grows." After lunch, Thomas drove them to the downtown building that would soon become the home of the Whisper Project. It was an old library, abandoned years ago but still filled with light. The windows stretched high, and dust floated like tiny stars in the air. Amara ran inside first, her sneakers squeaking on the tile floor. "It is huge," she said, her voice echoing. "It feels like a story waiting to happen." Thomas smiled. "Then we will fill it with stories." He opened a notebook filled with sketches of the layout rooms for art, reading, and storytelling. "This will be the first place in the city built entirely for children who need to be heard," he said. Mrs. Carter looked around, her eyes glistening. "Lily would be proud of you, Thomas." He paused for a moment, feeling emotion tighten his throat. "I hope so. This was her dream, to make the world softer for children who feel unseen." Amara walked up beside him, looking at the open space. "Then we can make her dream real." He knelt beside her. "That is exactly what we will do." For the next few hours, they worked together. Amara swept the floor, while Mrs. Carter wiped the old wooden tables. Thomas cleaned the windows himself, the sunlight growing brighter with every pane he polished. The air smelled of dust, soap, and hope. When they finished, they stood in the middle of the room, breathing hard but smiling. "It already feels different," Amara said. "It does," Thomas agreed. "Sometimes change begins the moment people decide to care." They left as the afternoon light turned golden, the promise of new beginnings painted across the city skyline. On the drive home, Amara hummed softly, the tune gentle and full of joy. That evening, Thomas sat on the back porch, watching the sun disappear behind the trees. Amara joined him, holding her sketchbook. "I made something for you," she said shyly. He looked at her with curiosity. "What is it?" She handed him the page. It was a drawing of a tree with deep roots and wide branches. Under it stood two figures holding hands, a man and a little girl. Above them, she had written, "Truth gives life." He stared at it for a long time, his heart full. "It is beautiful, Amara. May I keep it?" She nodded. "It is for your office at the Whisper Project, so you never forget how it started." He folded the drawing carefully and said, "I will frame it. It will be the first thing people see when they walk in." The air grew cool as the first stars appeared. They sat together in silence, watching the light fade from the sky. After a few moments, Amara spoke softly. "Mr. Reed, do you think Lily is happy now?" Thomas looked toward the horizon. "I think she is. I think she is watching us and smiling." Amara hugged her knees. "Sometimes I talk to her when I cannot sleep. I tell her about school and my grandma and you." He turned to her, touched. "What does she say back?" "She tells me to keep being brave," Amara said simply. "She says truth is like a candle. You do not hide it when the world gets dark. You hold it higher." Thomas felt his chest tighten again, but this time it was not pain, it was peace. "Then she is still teaching both of us," he said softly. They sat there until the stars filled the sky, the night calm and full of gentle light. The world around them seemed to breathe easily again, free from secrets, free from fear. And as the wind moved through the garden, Thomas realized that this was what healing looked like. Not grand gestures, not wealth restored, but quiet evenings shared with those who reminded you that truth, when spoken with love, could turn even broken hearts into something whole again. The next few days moved like gentle waves, calm and steady. The construction team had begun working on the old library that would soon become the Whisper Project Center. Every morning, Thomas Reed arrived early to oversee the progress, and every afternoon, Amara came by after school with her sketchbook in hand. The workers had grown used to her cheerful presence. They often called her the little boss, because she would point to the walls and say, "That corner needs more light," or "The truth room should be painted blue." Thomas always smiled when he saw her take charge. The sight reminded him of Lily, her confidence, her warmth, her quiet way of leading without making anyone feel small. On that particular morning, the air was filled with the sound of hammers and saws. Sunlight poured through the half-repaired windows, painting gold lines across the dusty floor. Amara stood beside Thomas, holding a small notebook. "Mr. Reed," she said, "I have been thinking about what to put on the first wall." He turned to her, curious. "Tell me." She opened her notebook to reveal a drawing of children gathered in a circle, each holding a candle. In the middle of the drawing were the words, "One whisper can start a fire that warms the world." Thomas looked at the image for a long moment. "That is powerful, Amara," he said quietly. "It says everything this place is meant to stand for." Amara smiled proudly. "Then it will be the first wall." By afternoon, they had chosen the colors soft cream, ocean blue, and a pale green that reminded Amara of the clinic garden. Mrs. Carter arrived with sandwiches and tea for everyone. She moved through the busy room like sunlight itself, offering kindness to every worker she met. "Mr. Reed," she said with a gentle laugh, "I think your little partner is running this project more than you are." Thomas smiled. "That is the best kind of leadership, honest and full of purpose." Mrs. Carter nodded. "She gets that from Lily. You can see it in her heart." As evening approached, the workers began packing up for the day. The air grew quiet, except for the soft rustle of wind through the open doorway. Thomas, Amara, and Mrs. Carter stood in the middle of the half-finished room, looking around. "It already feels alive," Amara said softly. "It does," Thomas agreed. "Do you know why?" "Because people worked hard?" she guessed. He shook his head gently. "Because it is built on truth. Buildings made of honesty carry their own kind of light." Amara looked up at him thoughtfully. "Then it will never go dark." Later that night, back at the mansion, Amara sat at the dining table working on a new drawing while Thomas read through reports from the project. Outside, rain began to fall again, tapping against the windows like quiet applause from the sky. "Mr. Reed," she said suddenly, breaking the silence, "do you think the people who lied before will ever tell the truth now?" He lowered the papers and looked at her. "Some will," he said. "Others might never. But every time someone like you speaks honestly, it makes it easier for the next person to do the same. That is how truth grows." She nodded slowly. "So it is like planting seeds?" "Yes," he said. Exactly like that. Amara smiled. Then the Whisper Project is a garden of truth. Thomas paused, repeating her words softly to himself. A garden of truth, he said. That is what we will call it. The next day, those very words were printed across the new sign that hung over the library's entrance. The Whisper Project, a garden of truth. When the workers lifted it into place, Amara clapped her hands and laughed, her joy echoing through the street. Passersby stopped to look, drawn by the simple beauty of the phrase. A local reporter who had covered the original story happened to walk by. She recognized Thomas and smiled. That name, she said. Did the little girl choose it? Thomas glanced at Amara, who was standing on the steps, waving shyly. Yes, he said. She always finds the right words. The reporter nodded. Then it will reach people's hearts. By evening, news of the foundation's new name had spread online. Comments poured in from strangers thanking Thomas and Amara for reminding them that honesty and kindness could still change the world. But Thomas did not read the comments for fame or approval. He read them because each message was proof that Amara's whisper had grown into something far bigger, a movement that touched lives beyond their city. That night, after dinner, Thomas walked into the garden behind his house. The roses shimmered under the moonlight. Amara followed quietly, carrying a small lantern. Do you remember the first night I came here? She asked. When you almost drank the wrong medicine? He nodded. I remember everything. She looked down at her hands. It feels like that was a long time ago. It was only days, he said softly. But sometimes truth changes time. It makes moments feel larger than years. They stood side by side in silence, the lantern casting a warm circle of light around them. The air was cool, and the scent of the roses was sweet and sharp. Amara whispered, I think Lily is proud of you. Thomas looked up at the stars. I hope so. I am finally trying to live the way she believed I could. Amara smiled gently. Then she knows. The lantern flickered, its flame swaying in the wind. Thomas bent slightly and shielded it with his hand. Do you see that? He asked. Even a small light can survive the wind if you protect it. Amara nodded. Just like truth. He smiled. Yes, Amara, just like truth. They stood there until the lantern burned low, two souls bound by one whisper that had changed everything, a whisper that had saved a life, mended a broken heart, and planted a garden where truth could bloom forever. The following morning carried the smell of fresh paint and new beginnings. The Whisper Project building was nearly finished now. The workers had left their brushes drying by the windows, and the sound of saws had been replaced by the rustle of curtains being hung. The once abandoned library had turned into something alive, something warm. Sunlight streamed through the wide glass panels, scattering soft golden light across the new wooden floor. Thomas Reed stood in the doorway, looking around in quiet awe. The world outside still knew him as the man who rebuilt his company after a scandal. But inside these walls, he was something else entirely, a man who had learned to listen. Behind him, Amara skipped into the room carrying a stack of bright posters. Look, Mr. Reed, she said excitedly. I finished the designs for the kids' corner. He turned, smiling. Let me see them. She spread them out across a long table. Each poster carried drawings of children, different faces, different colors, all holding candles that glowed softly. At the bottom of each poster, she had written one sentence in neat block letters. Truth never shouts, it whispers. Thomas looked at her with quiet admiration. It is perfect, Amara. You have given this place its voice. Amara grinned proudly. Do you think people will like it? They will not just like it, he said softly. They will feel it. Mrs. Carter arrived a few moments later, carrying a basket of homemade muffins. Good morning, everyone, she said warmly. I brought breakfast for the crew. Amara ran to help her. Grandma, look at what I made. Mrs. Carter smiled as she looked over the posters. You are an artist of the heart, my dear. Oh. As they ate, Thomas explained the plan for the official opening. The mayor will be there, along with families from the community. But I do not want speeches about me or my company. I want the focus to stay where it belongs, on truth, on the children, and on what Amara's courage started. Mrs. Carter nodded. That is the right choice. Let the truth speak for itself. After breakfast, they began decorating. Amara climbed a small ladder to hang garlands of paper stars she had made with her classmates. Each star stands for someone who told the truth this year, she explained. I asked my teacher to let everyone write one. Thomas watched her carefully place each star along the window frame. How many are there? He asked. 37, she said proudly. And I saved one space for you. He raised an eyebrow. For me? She nodded. You told the truth about your company, even when it was scary. That makes you part of it too. He felt a lump rise in his throat. Then I am honored to be among the stars. The day passed in a blur of color and laughter. Volunteers arrived to set up tables, arrange books, and hang signs. The Whisper Project was no longer a dream, it was real. It smelled of fresh paint, ink, and hope. That evening, after everyone had gone home, Thomas and Amara stayed behind to look at their work. The building glowed softly under the warm light of the lamps. The murals on the walls shimmered with bright colors. Amara sat cross-legged on the floor, sketching something new. What are you drawing tonight? Thomas asked. A promise, she said without looking up. He smiled. What kind of promise? She kept her eyes on the paper. That I will never stop telling the truth, even if my voice shakes. Thomas watched her for a moment. That is a promise worth keeping. She looked up, her eyes shining. Will you make one too? He hesitated, then said quietly, Yes, I promise that I will never turn away from the truth again, no matter how much it hurts. Amara nodded approvingly. Then we both promised. They shared a quiet smile. Outside, the first stars began to appear, their light reflecting through the large windows. Mrs. Carter called from the doorway. It is getting late, you two. Time to go home. Thomas turned off the lights one by one. Before they left, Amara placed her final drawing on the front door, a tree with roots shaped like open hands. Under it, she had written in careful letters, This house was built on truth. When they stepped outside, the cool evening breeze carried the scent of rain and new wood. The city lights shimmered in the distance. On the way home, Amara looked out the car window, quiet for a long time. Then she said softly, Mr. Reed, when I grow up, I want to help more people tell the truth too. He glanced at her through the rearview mirror. You already are, Amara. Every person who walks into that building will feel what you started. She smiled sleepily. But I want to build more of them. Maybe one in every city. He chuckled. Then I will be ready to help you when that time comes. She nodded, her voice fading as her eyes began to close. We will need a lot of candles. Thomas smiled to himself as the car drove through the quiet streets. Yes, he whispered, a lot of candles. When they reached the mansion, Mrs. Carter carried Amara upstairs to bed. Thomas lingered by the window, looking out at the city skyline. For years, he had built towers of glass and steel, monuments to success, but none of them had ever shined the way the Whisper Project did now. He whispered into the still air, Thank you, Lily. Thank you for sending her to me. Outside, a single star glowed brighter than the rest, as if answering him, and somewhere deep in his heart, Thomas knew that tomorrow's sunrise would not just mark another day, it would mark a new chapter in a world where truth had finally found its home. The morning of the grand opening arrived with clear skies and soft golden light pouring through the tall windows of the Whisper Project. The building, once silent and forgotten, now glowed with new life. Children's laughter echoed from the entrance as families gathered outside, their voices blending with the gentle music playing from a small speaker by the front steps. Thomas Reed stood near the doorway, adjusting his tie nervously. Though he had faced boardrooms, television cameras, and the sharp questions of journalists, this moment felt different. This was not about numbers or reputation. It was about truth, healing, and a promise that had begun with a whisper. Mrs. Carter approached him, carrying a tray of tea for the volunteers. You look like a man about to face his first day of school, she teased kindly. Thomas smiled. In a way, I am. This is the first thing in my life that feels truly right. She nodded, then breathed. The world will feel your heart before it hears your words. Amara ran toward them, her yellow hoodie freshly washed and her braids tied with blue ribbons. She carried a small wooden box in her hands. Mr. Reed, the kids are ready to start the ceremony. He crouched down to her level. What is in the box? She opened it proudly. Inside were dozens of folded notes, each one handwritten by children from her school. These are the first truths, she explained. Everyone wrote one thing they were brave enough to say out loud this year. We are going to put them inside the Tree of Voices. Thomas's eyes softened. That is beautiful, Amara. The Tree of Voices was a sculpture standing in the center of the building's main hall. It was made of recycled wood, its branches stretching toward the ceiling, each one carved with small spaces to hold paper leaves. On opening day, every visitor would place a note on its branches, a truth, a wish, or a promise. The hall filled quickly as families, teachers, and city officials entered. The air buzzed with anticipation. Cameras flashed, but Thomas paid them no mind. His eyes were on Amara, who stood confidently at the front of the room, holding her wooden box close to her chest. When the time came, the mayor gave a brief introduction, thanking Thomas for his contribution to the city. But when he finished, Thomas stepped forward and said quietly, "The person you should be thanking is standing right here." He gestured toward Amara. The crowd turned, and the little girl blushed but stood tall. "This project," Thomas continued, "was born from her courage. A child's truth changed my life. And today, I hope this place helps many others do the same. We built these walls not to hold power, but to protect honesty. Because truth, no matter how small, can light a path through even the darkest silence." The room fell still for a moment, and then gentle applause began to spread, rising until it filled the hall. Amara smiled, her hands trembling slightly as she stepped up to the sculpture. She opened the wooden box and took out the first folded paper. "This one says," she read aloud, "I told my teacher I was scared of reading out loud, and she helped me." The audience smiled. Amara placed the note carefully in the tree, then handed the box to Thomas. Together, they began adding the rest one by one until the branches shimmered with hundreds of handwritten truths. When the ceremony ended, people wandered through the building, exploring its rooms. Children painted murals on the walls, while others sat in the reading corner, flipping through books about courage and kindness. The air smelled of fresh wood and paper, with hints of tea from the refreshment table. Mrs. Carter watched from a distance, her heart full. "Look at her," she whispered to Thomas. "Your Lily would be proud." Thomas nodded, emotion catching in his throat. "I think she is here, somehow. I can feel her in every smile." Well, later that afternoon, when most of the guests had left, Amara stood by the Tree of Voices, staring up at the colorful notes fluttering gently in the air from the open windows. "It is beautiful," she said softly. "It is," Thomas agreed, standing beside her. "Every note carries a truth someone was brave enough to speak." Amara looked up at him. "Do you have one too?" He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to her. "What does it say?" she asked. He smiled gently. "You should read it." Amara unfolded it carefully and read aloud. "I once built a life out of silence, and it nearly destroyed me. But a child's whisper brought me back to the sound of truth." She looked at him, her eyes shining. "That is your truth." He nodded. "And yours reminded me how to find it." She carefully placed his note on one of the highest branches. "Now it belongs to the tree," she said. They stood together for a long time, watching the sunlight fade across the room. The golden glow made the branches shimmer as if alive. Outside, the evening breeze carried the laughter of children still playing near the steps. The sound was soft and pure, like a hymn of new beginnings. As they prepared to leave, Amara tugged at Thomas's sleeve. "Mr. Reed," she said, "do you think the world will change because of this place?" He looked around at the walls painted with hope and the tree heavy with truth. "I think it already has," he said quietly. "Change starts the moment someone chooses to listen." Amara smiled, holding his hand as they walked toward the door. Behind them, the Tree of Voices stood tall, its branches heavy with confessions, promises, and dreams. And in that gentle light, the whispers of truth continued to grow stronger, louder, and more beautiful than anyone had ever imagined. The morning after the opening ceremony, sunlight streamed through the large windows of the Whisper Project. The scent of paper, paint, and freshly cut flowers lingered in the air. The building was quiet now, but its silence was alive, filled with the echoes of laughter, clapping, and the sound of truth being spoken aloud. Thomas Reed arrived early. He walked through each room slowly, touching the smooth wooden tables and the painted walls that children had filled with drawings. Every detail reminded him of what they had built together, a home for honesty, hope, and courage. In the main hall, the tree of voices stood tall, its branches covered with colorful notes. Some were small promises, some were apologies. Some were confessions from children who had finally found a safe place to tell their truth. The sight made his chest tighten with emotion. As he stood there, he heard small footsteps approaching. "Good morning, Mr. Reed," Amara said, her voice soft but cheerful. He turned and smiled. "Good morning, Amara. You are up early." "I wanted to see the tree before anyone else came," she said. "I think it is even prettier in the morning." Thomas nodded. "It does look different in this light. The notes shine like leaves after the rain." Amara stepped closer, her small hand brushing against one of the branches. "Every one of these notes is a piece of someone's heart," she whispered. "That is what Grandma says truth is, pieces of our hearts we finally stop hiding." He looked down at her, touched by the quiet wisdom in her words. "Your grandmother is right again. She always seems to be." Amara giggled. "She says you should visit the clinic soon. The garden needs your help." He chuckled. "Then I will make sure to go this week." They spent the next hour walking around the building together, checking on each room. In the art corner, children's drawings from yesterday's event still hung on the drying lines. One caught Thomas's eye, a drawing of him and Amara standing beneath the tree of voices, both holding candles. Beneath it, in careful handwriting, were the words, "One whisper can change everything." He stared at it for a long moment. "You see this, Amara?" She nodded. "I think that one is from Jonah. He said he wants to be a writer when he grows up." "He already is one," Thomas said softly. "Anyone who can speak truth with courage is a writer of the world." Later that morning, a group of teachers arrived for a meeting. Thomas stepped aside to greet them, while Amara helped Mrs. Carter set out chairs and notebooks. As the adults discussed plans for upcoming programs, Amara sat quietly in the corner, listening. When the meeting ended, one of the teachers approached her. "You are the girl who helped start all this, right?" she asked kindly. Amara looked shy but nodded. "Yes, ma'am." The teacher smiled. "I just wanted to thank you. One of my students left a note on the tree yesterday. He wrote about something that happened at home. Because of that, we were able to help him. You made that possible." Amara blinked, surprised. "Really?" "Really," the teacher said. "You gave him the courage to speak." "What?" After the teachers left, Amara turned to Thomas, her voice trembling slightly. "Mr. Reed, someone was helped because of me." He knelt down beside her. "Yes, Amara, because of you, a child found safety. That is what truth does, it saves quietly." She smiled through the shimmer in her eyes. "Then Lily must be smiling too." He nodded. "I am sure she is." In the afternoon, they went back to the mansion together. The house no longer felt empty. Sunlight poured through the windows, landing on the photographs that lined the hallway, images of Lily, of charity events, and now, new pictures of the Whisper Project. Amara wandered through the study, stopping at the desk where Thomas kept her first drawing, the one of the tree with roots shaped like open hands. "Do you still look at this every day?" she asked. "Every morning," he replied. "It reminds me why we started everything." She tilted her head. "Do you ever miss your old life, before I came?" Thomas thought for a moment. "I miss parts of it," he said honestly, "but not the silence. My life back then looked full from the outside, but it was empty inside. You brought the sound of truth back into it." Amara smiled. "Then I am glad I knocked on your door that day." He smiled back, his voice soft. "So am I." As evening fell, Mrs. Carter joined them for dinner. The three of them sat together at the long table, sharing food and stories. The laughter was easy and unforced. When the meal ended, Amara leaned back in her chair, her eyes sleepy but peaceful. "Mr. Reed," she said drowsily, "when people write about you in books someday, what do you want them to say?" He looked at her thoughtfully. "I do not care if they remember me," he said, "but I hope they remember what truth can do." She yawned, smiling. "Then they will, because the truth always remembers itself." Thomas smiled at her words. "You are wise beyond your years, Amara." "I had good teachers," she said softly. "Lily, Grandma, and you." He looked at her for a long moment, his chest tightening with quiet gratitude. Later, after Mrs. Carter had taken Amara upstairs, Thomas walked out onto the balcony. The city stretched out below him, glowing under the silver moonlight. Somewhere in the distance, he could see the faint outline of the Whisper Project's roof. He whispered into the cool night air, "Thank you, Lily. Thank you for sending her." And as the wind carried his words into the darkness, Thomas realized that truth had not only rebuilt his world, it had rewritten it completely. It had turned regret into purpose, silence into light, and one child's whisper into a legacy that would outlive them all. The following week began with a soft chill in the air and a sky brushed with silver clouds. Autumn had arrived quietly, painting the city in shades of amber and gold. The Whisper Project was now officially open to the public every day, and it had already begun to hum with life. Each morning, children gathered in its rooms to draw, read, and share stories. The tree of voices grew heavier with paper leaves, truths, confessions, and small acts of courage that fluttered gently whenever the doors opened. Thomas Reed walked through the building that morning with a cup of coffee in hand. Every sound, the soft laughter of children, the echo of shoes on the polished floor filled him with gratitude. He had built skyscrapers and corporations before, but nothing had ever felt this alive. This was not success measured in wealth. It was something deeper, quieter, and far more lasting. He stopped by the art room, where Amara sat surrounded by a small group of children. She was showing them how to fold paper into tiny birds. Her voice was calm, steady, and patient, like a teacher who had been doing this all her life. "Make sure you crease the wings gently," she said. "If you rush, the paper will tear." A boy frowned as his paper ripped slightly. Amara smiled. "That is okay. Sometimes broken wings still learn how to fly." Thomas stood in the doorway, listening. There was something about her words that touched him every time she spoke. She carried wisdom far beyond her years, the kind of wisdom that only kindness and pain together can create. When she noticed him, her face lit up. "Mr. Reed, we are making truth birds. They will hang from the ceiling." He stepped inside, smiling. "Truth birds? That sounds wonderful. What are they for?" "They will remind people that truth can travel," she explained. "When you tell it, it flies from one heart to another." "That is a beautiful thought," he said softly. "May I hang one too?" "Of course," she said, handing him a folded piece of white paper. "You have to write a truth first, though." He took a pen from his pocket and thought for a moment. Then he wrote slowly, his handwriting steady and deliberate. "I used to think power made me strong. Now I know truth makes me free." When he finished, he handed it back to her. Amara read it silently, then smiled. "That one belongs right in the middle," she said, "so everyone sees it when they walk in." Mrs. Carter entered the room carrying a tray of snacks. "Time for a break," she called cheerfully. The children gathered around her, filling the room with chatter and excitement. As they ate, Thomas and Mrs. Carter stepped aside. "She has found her place here," Mrs. Carter said softly, looking at Amara. "You gave her that." Thomas shook his head gently. "She gave it to herself. I only built the walls. She filled them with light." Mrs. Carter smiled. "You know, Mr. Reed, it is strange how life works. Sometimes the ones who seem to need saving end up saving everyone else." He nodded thoughtfully. "Yes," he said, "that is exactly what she did." That afternoon, Thomas sat with Amara in the reading room. The shelves were lined with new books, some donated by local schools, others purchased through community funding. The room smelled of paper, wood, and the faint sweetness of vanilla from the candles that burned on the windowsill. Amara opened one of the books and began to read aloud. Her voice filled the room, soft but confident. It was a story about a girl who planted a seed that grew into a tree strong enough to shelter an entire village. When she finished, she closed the book and looked up. "That story reminds me of the Whisper Project," she said. "The girl planted one seed, and look what it became." Thomas nodded slowly. "That story reminds me of you, Amara." She looked surprised. "Me?" "Yes," he said. "You planted a truth when you spoke up that day, and now it has grown into something that shelters many hearts." She smiled shyly. "Then we did it together," he smiled back. "Yes, together." As the sun began to set, golden light filled the room. The dust in the air shimmered like tiny stars. Amara looked toward the window and said softly, "Mr. Reed, do you ever think Lily sees this?" He turned his gaze to the same fading light. "I do," he said quietly. Every day. I think she sees everything. Amara nodded, satisfied with his answer. Then she must be proud of you. Thomas took a deep breath, his chest tightening with both love and sorrow. I hope she is proud of us, he said, because everything we have built belongs to her spirit as much as it belongs to you. Outside, the first cool winds of autumn brushed through the city. Leaves drifted across the pavement, swirling in gentle circles. The world was changing again, slowly but beautifully. Before leaving, Amara placed one last truth bird on the ceiling, right above the tree of voices. On its wings she had written in careful letters, "Even whispers can carry love farther than we can see." Thomas read the words aloud, his voice soft and reverent. Even whispers can carry love farther than we can see. He looked at her with quiet awe. You never stop teaching me, Amara grinned. That is because truth keeps growing. Even when we are not watching. They turned off the lights and walked toward the exit. The building glowed faintly in the twilight, like a lantern in the heart of the city. And as they stepped outside, Thomas realized that this was what redemption truly looked like, not a single moment of forgiveness, but 1,000 small truths whispered bravely into the world until even silence learned how to listen again. The next morning arrived cold and clear. The first frost of the season glimmered faintly on the grass outside the Whisper Project. The sun rose slowly, spilling soft light through the tall windows and warming the chill inside. Thomas Reed stood near the front door, holding a steaming cup of coffee, his breath visible in the air. Every corner of the building now held life. Volunteers arranged books, children's drawings covered the walls, and the scent of baked muffins from Mrs. Carter's kitchen filled the air. But today felt different. Today marked 1 month since the project had opened. Amara arrived just after sunrise, her small figure wrapped in a thick blue scarf. She waved from the steps, her smile bright as ever. Good morning, Mr. Reed. Good morning, Amara, he said, opening the door. You are early. She grinned. I wanted to count the truth notes on the tree before everyone else comes. He raised an eyebrow, pretending to be serious. That is quite the mission. How many do you think there are now? She thought for a moment. Maybe 200. He chuckled. Then you had better start counting. Amara ran to the tree of voices in the main hall. The morning light poured over the branches, making the colorful papers shimmer. She began to count softly, whispering the numbers under her breath. When she reached 123, she stopped and looked back at Thomas. Do you think the tree will ever be full? She asked. He smiled. I hope not. Why not? Because that would mean people stop sharing, he said, and truth should never stop growing. Amara nodded thoughtfully. Then we will keep making space for more. Mrs. Carter entered then, carrying a box of small candles for the children's workshop. We will need these for the remembrance ceremony tonight, she said. Amara turned to Thomas. Remembrance ceremony? He nodded. We are lighting candles tonight for people who told the truth but were never heard. It is our way of saying that their voices matter, even now. Amara's face softened. Can I light one for Lily? Thomas hesitated, his heart tightening gently. Then he nodded. Yes, Amara. I think Lily would like that very much. That evening, families and volunteers gathered in the main hall. The lights were dim, and the tree of voices glowed softly under strands of white bulbs. Each person held a candle, its flame small but steady. Thomas stood at the front, his voice calm and clear. Tonight, we remember the voices that came before us, the ones who spoke truth when no one was ready to listen. Their courage made room for ours. He looked toward Amara, who stood beside Mrs. Carter. The child's candle flickered gently, reflecting in her wide brown eyes. When it was her turn, she stepped forward and placed her candle at the base of the tree. This one is for Lily, she said softly. She taught me that truth can whisper and still be strong. The room fell silent. The glow from the candles spread slowly across the hall, dancing against the notes that covered the branches. Thomas felt a deep calm settle inside him. It was as if every mistake, every silence, every regret had been turned into light. As the ceremony ended, Amara looked up at him. Mr. Reed, she whispered, do you think truth ever gets tired? He smiled faintly. No, Amara. Truth rests sometimes, but it never sleeps. It waits for someone brave enough to speak it again. She nodded. holding her small hands around the fading warmth of her candle. Then we will keep it awake. Outside, the frost returned, coating the world in silver. But inside the Whisper Project, the light continued to glow, fueled by whispers, courage, and the quiet strength of one child's voice that refused to fade. The next morning after the remembrance ceremony, the air was still and cool. The candles from the night before had burned down to small pools of wax beneath the tree of voices. The scent of smoke lingered faintly, soft and comforting, like a promise left behind. Thomas Reed arrived early, as he always did. He walked through the quiet halls, his footsteps echoing softly. Everywhere he looked, he saw signs of life, children's drawings, books stacked neatly, little paper birds hanging from the ceiling. The building that had once been forgotten now breathed with purpose. In the corner of the main hall, Amara sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting through new notes for the tree. Her scarf was wrapped loosely around her neck, her fingers smudged with bits of glue and color from the art supplies. "Good morning, Amara," Thomas said gently. She looked up and smiled. "Good morning, Mr. Reed. I am reading the new truths. Some of them are really brave." He crouched beside her. "Would you like to read me one?" She nodded and unfolded a small yellow note. This one says, "I told my mom I was sorry for lying. She hugged me and said she already forgave me." Thomas listened, then said softly, "That one sounds like healing." Amara smiled. "Yes, it feels warm when people tell the truth like that." He nodded. "Truth often feels like warmth. It burns a little at first, but then it lights everything around it." She tilted her head, thinking. "Like the candles last night." "Exactly," he said. A few moments later, Mrs. Carter entered carrying a basket of breakfast muffins. "You two have been here since dawn again," she said, setting the basket on the table. "You need to eat something before the morning crowd comes in." Amara jumped up to help her. "I will bring plates." As they prepared breakfast, Thomas watched them, two souls who had changed everything about his world. The guilt and loneliness that once haunted him had been replaced by something steady and strong. Gratitude. After they finished eating, Thomas sat down at his desk near the front of the hall. A pile of letters waited for him, messages from schools, community leaders, even other cities asking how to start their own Whisper projects. He began to read through them, each one filling him with quiet amazement. Amara walked over and peeked at one of the letters. "Are they really going to build more?" He smiled. "It looks that way. People want to create spaces for truth everywhere." Her eyes widened. "That means the whisper is spreading." "It is," he said proudly. "And it started with you." She looked down shyly. "It started with Lily too." Thomas nodded, his voice gentle. "Yes, it started with both of you, and it will keep growing because of everyone who believes in what you began." Outside, the morning light grew brighter, flooding through the tall windows and washing the room in gold. The city was beginning to stir beyond the glass, but inside, time felt slower, more peaceful. Amara walked back to the tree of voices and placed one final note among the branches. Thomas watched as she smoothed it carefully, making sure it stayed secure. When she stepped back, he asked quietly, "What does this one say?" She smiled. "It says, 'The truth does not belong to the powerful, it belongs to the brave.'" Thomas's chest tightened at her words. That might be the most important truth of all. Amara looked up at him, her eyes full of light. "Then we will keep reminding them." He nodded. "Yes, Amara, as long as there are whispers, there will be someone listening." The clock ticked softly in the background. The sound was steady, grounding. Life, once chaotic, had become simple and good. Mrs. Carter called from across the room. "The children from the morning group are arriving." Amara ran to the door, ready to welcome them. Her laughter echoed through the hall, bright, fearless, and full of grace. Thomas stayed behind for a moment, looking once more at the tree, the candles, and the sunlight spilling across the floor. He whispered to himself, "Lily, you were right. Truth never shouts, it whispers, and those whispers have changed everything." Outside, the first voices of children filled the air, and the Whisper Project began another day alive, growing, and carried forward by the courage of one small girl who dared to speak. Winter arrived quietly, blanketing the city in soft white snow. The Whisper Project stood in the heart of it all, glowing like a lantern against the gray sky. Warm light spilled from its windows, and laughter echoed faintly from inside. Even in the coldest months, the building never slept. It remained alive, fueled by stories, by courage, and by truth. Thomas Reed walked slowly through the main hall, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The tree of voices now stood taller than ever, its branches heavy with thousands of colorful notes. Each paper leaf carried a truth, a promise, or a lesson learned. The air around it seemed to hum softly, as if every word written there still whispered in the room. He stopped at the base of the tree, brushing his hand lightly over one of the new notes. It read, "I am not afraid to be honest anymore." He smiled quietly. That sentence alone was enough to remind him why everything had been worth it. Behind him, the door opened, letting in a rush of cold air and a familiar voice. "Mr. Reed," Amara called, her breath forming tiny clouds as she ran in. She was bundled in her yellow coat, her scarf almost too big for her small frame. He turned and smiled warmly. "Good morning, Amara. You are early again." "I had to bring you something," she said, holding a small wrapped package in her mittened hands. He raised an eyebrow. "For me?" She nodded proudly. "It is a Christmas present." He took the package gently and unwrapped it. Inside was a small glass ornament, shaped like a candle. Hand-painted around its base were the words, "Truth lights the way." Thomas looked at it for a long moment, touched beyond words. "It is beautiful, Amara. Did you make this?" She nodded. "With Grandma's help, we wanted you to have something for the tree." He smiled, his voice low and full of emotion. "Then we will hang it together." They walked to the tree of voices. Amara chose a branch near the top and reached up on her toes. Thomas steadied her as she hung the ornament carefully, the glass catching the light like a tiny flame. When she stepped back, she whispered, "Now the tree can glow, even in the dark." Thomas looked down at her, his heart full. "You already made it glow, Amara. This just helps it shine." Mrs. Carter entered a few moments later, carrying a basket of freshly baked cookies. "You two are up early again," she said, smiling. "I should have known." Amara laughed. "We were decorating." "Well," Mrs. Carter said, setting down the basket, "the world could use more mornings like this." As the three of them stood by the tree, the city outside began to wake. Snowflakes drifted past the tall windows, glimmering like bits of glass. The world was quiet, peaceful, waiting. Thomas turned to Amara. "Do you remember what you told me the day you warned me not to drink the medicine?" She thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I said, 'Do not drink it.' She changed the medicine." He nodded. "Yes, those words changed everything. They were small, but they carried truth, and that truth saved lives." Amara smiled shyly. "I did not mean to be brave that day. I was just scared." He knelt beside her. "That is what makes it real courage, Amara. You spoke even though you were scared. That is the kind of courage the world needs most." She looked up at him. "Do you think there will be more people like that? More whispers that save others?" He smiled gently. "There already are. Every time someone tells the truth, your whisper lives again." The room fell into a soft, golden silence. The tree of voices shimmered in the morning light, its branches heavy with hope. Mrs. Carter handed each of them a cookie and said softly, "Merry Christmas, my loves. The world feels lighter because of you both." Amara leaned her head against Thomas's arm. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Reed." He smiled, his voice steady and warm. "Merry Christmas, Amara." Outside, the snow continued to fall, wrapping the world in quiet peace. Inside, the candle ornament gleamed softly at the heart of the tree, a single light born from one whisper of truth that had changed everything. And as Thomas looked around the room filled with love, courage, and new beginnings, he finally understood what redemption truly meant. It was not a grand moment or a public victory. It was this, a small child's voice, a single act of honesty, and a world forever changed by the power of listening.